Welcome to our next installment of Workday's Accessibility Level Up series. Today we're bringing together accessibility professionals, and we're not asking them to speak on behalf of their organization, more from their own experiences over the years in this industry and to gain insights from their lessons learned. Let's meet our panelists. Liz?
Hi, I'm Liz Heaney. I lead an accessibility team at Google.
Hi, I'm Rashmi Garimella, and I'm an accessibility analyst at Google.
I'm Eudora Struble, and I work at Wake Forest University as the Director of Technology Accessibility.
So first and foremost, how does one get started building an accessibility procurement practice? Liz, who are our allies in this?
I would start with leadership. If you get leadership on board, they'll be able to open the doors for the other partnerships that you need in order to establish this successfully. Then I could go to legal or procurement. The thing with legal is they understand the risk that you're incurring by buying a product that's not accessible. So they are a likely ally. I would then follow up with procurement. And procurement is a little trickier because what you're doing is going to be adding more effort to their process and potentially dilating the duration of the procurement process. And they tend to be measured on that as well. So they're a trickier sell. That's where leadership could come in handy, or someone whose heartstrings can get pulled in that role would be really helpful. Finally, I would say the PMO, that's the project management office, because normally when you decide whether you build or buy, that's a decision that normally goes through a project. Oh. And so then having them on their side and making sure that they ask those questions would help you get that established.
I agree with all of the allies you mentioned, Liz. Mm-hmm. And I think one way to get started looking at procurement and accessibility is actually partnering with your information security review process. Mm-hmm. And that often can help you get ahead of that adding work to the procurement process. Oh, if you're able to find a way to align your accessibility reviews alongside what the security is already doing on in your organizations, then that's a really good way to be able to build some efficiencies and to partner alongside existing risk management processes.
Love that.
That's a fantastic suggestion, Eudora. When you're looking at that, what do you think the role of accessibility is in the procurement process? Do you think it can have influence over the whole process?
I absolutely think it has to be at the table with all of the other considerations. So there are procurement's complicated. There are a lot of stakeholders. Yeah. There's budgetary costs, there's the actual functional assessments, there's licensing, there's security, there's now AI security, and there's data, right? There are a lot of things that are in the mix. And so if you're not at the table with accessibility from the start, it can really get missed. And historically, that's what's happened a lot of times, is accessibility is an afterthought, not something that's actually being considered during the evaluation and the contract process.
And once a product is in your system, it's really difficult to roll that back, for sure. So Liz, what do you think the role of accessibility is in the procurement process? Does it have an influence?
Yeah, I'll talk to you maybe how it participates along it, if that's okay. So you would be able to introduce the questions that procurement will ask the prospective vendors with regards to accessibility. You'll request as part of that an ACR. An ACR is an accessibility conformance report. I know you know that. It's maybe referred to as VPAT incorrectly because that's just a template. Well, once you get those ACRs, you can compare them between the different vendors, maybe create a rubric to help you score them and help compare them from an accessibility point of view. As you get closer to narrowing it down to 2 or 3, you could conduct a smoke test or request an accessibility demo from these vendors to ensure you understand the issues that they have with accessibility on their products. It also helps you verify the claims made in the ACR. Once you do that, then you can prioritize the issues for the finalist and ensure that we get those addressed before the product launches. It's important if you're able to add those as part of the statement of work, SOW, to ensure that there's maybe potentially penalties if those aren't addressed in time. For the issues that will remain after launch, should that happen, then you can work with your accommodations team to ensure that they're prepared to support people who are going to be struggling with those issues, or tech support if this product's going to be used by your users.
So Liz, you mentioned a lot of great steps in a process, and I would like to dig into that a little more. Rashmi, what does a good procurement process look like? And you've been in this industry for a while. How do you feel like it's changed over the years?
So I can say the change is coming with the new regulations. Now we are all talking about EAA, which is European Accessibility Act. And now accessibility has taken this center stage. And now when we are asking a vendor, what is the accessibility status in your product, they are not surprised. And now they are willing to work with us and make some impact in terms of accessibility. So process-wise, it is an individual thing or org. It is always evolving, and you can always collect feedback from all the offices which Liz mentioned and get it better each time. So this is what I think process-wise we are at.
So Eudora, is the process for procurement and accessibility really different in higher ed? And same question for you, how has it changed over the years?
It's not terribly different. We have a lot of stakeholders that we have to get to the table to try to do the work and make sure that we're in that procurement process early. One thing that has changed somewhat, and probably in industry also, but certainly in higher ed, is higher ed used to build a lot of its own tools, a lot of homegrown solutions, which meant that maybe I could train my friends, the developers down the hall, in great accessibility practices. And now I have dozens, hundreds of third-party tools on the campus. And so we really have to rely on those vendors to be great partners, to evolve with us, to be committed to the work. And the process that they were discussing is so important. That scope of work, that contract, you really have to make sure that you're embedding accessibility into those things. And you have to make sure that when you are working with a vendor early on, they understand how much accessibility matters to you and that you will be checking in with them, that they'll hear about it again.
So Eudora, I've heard a lot about EDUCAUSE and some acronym called HECFAT.
Yes.
And I think a lot of this is about higher education, and you've been very involved in this. Can you explain a little more to us about what that's about?
Yeah, so EDUCAUSE is a higher ed technology organization, and the HECFAT is a product that they've been working on for a while. It is the Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Toolkit. And it was originally designed for security. Again, that's the importance of security in the procurement review. And in the last couple of versions, we've inserted accessibility questions. So I'm just a part of a big team that's been adding some accessibility into it. And EDUCAUSE has really made it a strong toolkit that allows vendors to put their information in one place for security, privacy, AI, and accessibility, so that when vendors send those toolkits over, analysts for accessibility and privacy and security know exactly what to expect. They have a rating system. So it provides some consistency across both vendor and higher ed engagements. And really, most of those questions on the accessibility side are getting to that vendor maturity. So as I said before, are they going to be a good partner? I sign a contract for 5 years. I want to know I'm getting into like a really good long-term relationship, right? And that's something else that is a great thing to talk to procurement about, because procurement knows that value is more than just the check you write or the thing you purchase. It's really about that relationship.
So do you think the HECFAT is something that other industries should look at and leverage? It seems like a fantastic toolkit.
I think it is. I might be a little biased. I think that it certainly is worthwhile for industry to look at the consolidation. The ACR/VPAT is one thing, but that maturity assessment that the HECFAT questions are trying to get at, I think that can be a really powerful tool, even if you don't use the whole HECFAT, just looking at those questions.
That's fascinating. So Rashmi, I have a question because it's a little bit flippant, but a lot of people would say that it starts and stops with an accessibility conformance report. And so do you agree? Is that something that everyone just needs to look at the accessibility conformance report to make a decision?
So I have two pieces for the answer. So first piece is a organization where the accessibility in procurement is not very mature. they request and receive ACR, or VPAT they call it. So they request or receive ACR, and that is the end, and that is the beginning and end of it. Okay. But in the organizations which are more mature practice for accessibility in procurement, ACR is just the beginning. Once we receive the ACR, the whole work starts around it, okay? So we are now looking at it, how good it look. Okay, now we are verifying the claim made by the vendor that these claims are correct or not. We are doing some in-house testing to validate that claims, and then we work with the vendor on the roadmap if there are any gaps in our validation and their ACR report. We are validating those claims. We are working with the roadmap with the vendor to fix those issues, and it is a continuous process. So if your software is changing, version is changing, any regulation is changing, we are again repeating the same process, and that's how it is. ACR is just the start, and it can be start or end for some, right? That's what I think.
Agreed. And actually, to add a little to this, I think that ACRs will allow you to compare one vendor with another, regardless of whether you're mature or not. Now, we would all wish that that is the only consideration or the top consideration when procuring software. But in general, you get funding to meet a business need. So the most important consideration tends to be how many features that the business requires are being met by the software tool. And then I would say second would come to be the pricing. Is this within the budget that the team was allocated to spend? And then comes accessibility for maybe potentially products that are comparable, particularly, I would say, in the private industry. I think maybe if it were required by law, it could be slightly different. However, mostly we've noticed that most products aren't really at the accessibility level that we want them to be. So you're picking issues from one vendor compared to issues from another vendor in the end.
Best of the worst.
Indeed, indeed. But at least it gets you ahead, and it allows you to understand what needs to be addressed and what can skip. One other thing with ACRs, and I don't know if I'm going too long, but is the fact that it's sometimes the ACR you're given is not for the product that is currently off the shelf.
Wow.
Yes, and it's not as uncommon as a wow might indicate, right? So if it's not for the current product, now you have a little more work to do. And it goes also to the nature of what Rashmi is saying. It's a continuing practice. And you also mentioned that, right? Like long relationships. So it's important that you keep issues that you found, issues reported by your users in a single location so that procurement can hold the vendor accountable throughout the duration of that contract and at the time of renewing the contract with that vendor.
As Liz mentioned, the ACR can be compared to get at certain facts, like is it the right actual software that you're looking at? Or did the vendor put non-applicable or supports for every category on the conformance report? There are things that you can see that indicate that a vendor is not mature, that they don't understand, that they need a roadmap to tell you how they're going to fix their accessibility problems, that no product is perfectly accessible, that there will always be some things to work on. So if you are in that early stages of procurement and accessibility and you're looking at two ACRs, if one vendor has a lot of notes and links and roadmap and clearly says how they've tested, that's a really good indicator. And if another vendor has just blanks and does not apply and supports for everything, that's a sign that you probably need to dig a little deeper.
Great point. So what are some gaps that you've seen in the procurement process for accessibility and maybe some improvements or quick wins that people can make?
Yeah, I think that we've talked a little bit about this before. The procurement process is really a way to make some very quick wins and is a place to look for the gaps. So the RFP process, so it's a request for proposal, sometimes called RFX. It's a process by which you might get bids from different organizations for a solution, for a functional software or service. And so if you're able to have a standard section on accessibility within that, the vendor will know that you're serious about accessibility.
Yeah.
They will have some questions that they will know they need to give you answers to. Then you can compare those along with ACRs, perhaps, to understand if the vendor is mature, if they are going to provide you with an accessible product. Of course, there's all the testing and other information gathering that needs to happen on the other side. But that can be a really quick way to start grabbing at some accessibility wins within an organization. And the other thing is that your contract language should have accessibility information in it and some contractual obligations from the vendor. There will be times the vendor might push back, and that can be a great opportunity to have a conversation about how important it is to have accessibility as part of the product you're purchasing.
Yeah, totally agree with Eudora. Start early. Have the language in your contract in SOW and code of conduct. Hold vendor accountable. And these are the improvement I'm suggesting. And also have them at the time of renewal and keep some, at the time of software renewal, have if there's a new version or new guidelines, include them in your contract at the time of renewal. Keep some time aside for testing and some money budget thing for testing. So these are some improvement we can implement. And thinking about gaps, I think the biggest gap is trusting vendor blindly. That hey, this is my ACR, and okay, checkbox is checked, and we are going with this. So that is the first gap. So even though you know that vendor you're working, the trust people change, process changes. So you must every time do your due diligence on those claims and do the right thing.
That's fantastic. So I want to ask each of you a question. If you could leave our audience with one recommendation, what would that be? Let's start with you, Rashmi.
With me? All right. So don't buy barriers, buy bridges.
Love that.
Thank you.
That is great. Okay, I'll say that at the end of the day, you buy software to make your users more efficient. So let's make sure that we make all of our users more efficient.
And I would say just get started. Like everything with accessibility, there is no perfect, there's just progress. So figure out where you have influence and where you can make change and just get started trying to implement those baby steps.
Fantastic. To wrap up, achieving true accessibility in procurement requires a multifaceted approach that goes beyond simply adhering to legal mandates. We need a proactive commitment from our organizations to identify and address barriers. Ultimately, prioritizing accessibility in procurement not only benefits suppliers and the wider community, but also strengthens the organization itself by fostering innovation, reinforcing standards, reducing risk, and achieving better value through a more competitive pool of potential vendors. I'd like to thank our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. In future Level Up sessions, we'll dive deeper into understanding different roles, different topics, and running your accessibility programs. See you next time.